Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I am going to be Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I am going to be reviewing Darksword Armory's two-handed Danish sword. I got this one off of their sale list on their website, so it did come with one or two small defects, which I will very briefly gloss over because they were things that were expected going into it. They're not anything that I'm going to hold against the blade or the manufacturer because of that. Now, a bit of a word ahead of time with any sword reviews I do here on the channel. I am not a professional historian, nor am I a professional sword person of any sort. I am not someone who puts swords through extensive, rigorous cutting tests, anything like that. I'm just a guy who really likes swords and who really likes taking photos with them, having fun with them, all sorts of cool outfits, cosplays, all that jazz. So, getting right into the two-handed Danish sword from Darksword. First off, the size. Now, I am not the world's tallest guy, so at a 39-inch blade, this one sits pretty nicely between a longsword and a greatsword. It's a little bit longer than I would typically like for the average longsword. For me, it is a little bit big to sit at my hip, but not quite big enough to sit on my back like you would have with a greatsword. It's also not quite as bulky or as long of a handle as I would like from a greatsword. If I did have to categorize it though, I would put it slightly more into the greatsword category, just because it is almost a 40-inch blade there. Now, getting into the design of the sword itself. This one is based off of historical pieces, which I always like to see that in a blade. I do very much prefer ones that you can find their historical replicas of over fantasy blades or wouldn't this be nice blades. Nothing against them. I do own a couple of those myself. I just have the preference for historical replicas. Now, as you can see right off the bat, it does have a pretty long ricasso here that's dented into the blade some, which I personally love that. It makes it really great for half sorting the blade, not quite as high up as you would find with some of your larger, more traditional greatsword type swords, but it does help get you some really nice leverage in there for if you are half sorting with your blade at all. Now, the next thing about the sword is its weight and its balance. Now, as you can see, I am holding it with one hand without a problem at all. This thing is light as a feather. It is under 3 pounds. And the balance point is right about towards the end of the ricasso there. So it is beautifully weighted for a sword of its length. Probably helps that it's got a nice long guard in there. Now, if I wanted to handle this with one hand, I could do so quite easily for an extended period of time. Part of the reason, again, why I am hesitant to really call this a greatsword. But you get that second hand on there, much like any longsword, any greatsword. You do have much better control over it, much more fine movements become available to you, and it moves nicely. It's a blade that very much moves well, and like I said, I'm not someone who's going to be doing cutting tests with it. I'm not someone who's going to be sparring with it or anything like that. But when you're taking videos, taking photos by yourself, with yourself, you still want something that you're going to be able to move nicely and that's going to feel nice in your hands. Now, the downsides of the blade that I have found thus far. First off, if you look at the quillions here, they are pretty sharply swept up, which is not inherently a bad thing. But if you take a close look at the ends of the quillions here, while they're not sharpened, they do come to a pretty good point. So regardless of if you're wearing it on your side or on your back, unless you've got some sort of armor on or some sort of serious padding there, you are going to get jabbed with those quillions, and it is not the most pleasant sensation in the world. Now, historically, there was a reason for having those steeply upswept, sharpened quillions. It was very much for when you were in close with your opponent, you wanted to be able to get under their helmet if they weren't wearing a bever, and be able to get them through there, take advantage of something that your sword would have in a much closer environment that an opponent's equally long blade might not. Now, the next downside about it, and really the only other one that I find to date, is, again, that size. It's a little bit too big for me to feel comfortable calling it a longsword for someone my size. For someone who's a few inches taller than me, absolutely, might work very well as a longsword, but for someone my size, it's a little bit too big to comfortably call as a longsword, and like I was saying, to comfortably wear at the hip. Now, because it is a little bit too small to classify completely as a greatsword, and also because of those quillions that I was talking about, it doesn't quite fit well on the back either. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy around back scabbards, and believe you me, I am firmly in that anti-back scabbard camp for the most part. There is a historical precedence for greatswords being worn on the back when they were not in use. You were carrying around your greatsword, having it on your back was the best way to carry it because they were such massive swords. They were something where when you did need the sword, you would take it off of your back and discard of the scabbard so it did not get in your way. But it is something where there is a historical precedence in a limited capacity. Now, those couple of little things about the blade that I knew going into it. First off, there is some minor scuffing, scratch marks, all that sort of stuff on the grip. It is not quite as polished as you would typically find from one of Darksword's pieces. Now, one thing that the page did say about this sword when I was looking at it was that there was a slight warp in the upper third of the blade, and I have looked at it pretty extensively to try and find that warp, and I cannot find it. So I am not going to say that there is a warp there. I cannot see a warp. I've looked at it very closely from every angle, so maybe I just got lucky, or maybe it's just so small that it's not perceptible to me, but the quality control at Darksword was able to pick up on it, but I do not see a warp in it. Now, moving on to talking about the scabbard. Now, the scabbard is absolutely lovely. It is a beautiful, beautiful piece, pretty much exactly what you would expect from all of Darksword's other scabbards. Same design as you would find from the majority of them. Now, I did order it with the belt, which the belt I am going to either have to modify myself or take off entirely, as it is a little bit too big for me again. Maybe if I was wearing my full armor getup, it might fit, but it would still probably be a bit loose. It just is too big to go around my waist there as is, and it's too big and in the wrong direction to go over my shoulder. As someone who's right-handed, I don't want to have to draw a sword over my left shoulder, and like we've talked about with back scabbards, there really isn't a huge precedence for drawing them over the shoulder for a combat situation. You would usually take the scabbard off to draw the sword and then discard of it. Now, the one thing I will say about the scabbard is it does have a little bit of damage on it, a little bit of imperfections that was not listed on the site. Nothing huge, nothing major, nothing that I am going to hold against it or Darksword, because again, it is still a perfectly good, usable, good-looking scabbard. But if we take a look here at the chape, we can see that there is some scuffing, some scratch marks. It's not the most beautifully polished piece of metal. Now, at the opposite end, if we take a look at the Rain Guard, the die is a little bit splotchy. Now, personally, I don't mind having some of those small imperfections. To me, it adds to the character of the sword and the character of the scabbard. You look at historical pieces in museums, you look at tapestries and manuscripts and everything with all of these historical pieces in them. They did have small inconsistencies, small flaws to them. The machining that we use today, the exact sciences that we have today with everything that we are crafting and forging just did not exist several hundred years ago. So some of those small inconsistencies, some of those small, what many would refer to as flaws, are not something that I am going to hold against the piece or the manufacturer at all. It is just something to be aware of if that is the sort of thing that you look out for. Now, one of the things that I do really love about the scabbard, besides just, I love Darksword's design of scabbards, that double ridge on the front of it is one of my favorite scabbard designs on the market right now, is this scabbard is light as a feather. Now, a part of it comes down to how narrow it is, because again, we are not talking about the world's largest blade here. This is not a very thick blade. It's somewhere around 2 inches across at the widest, but because of that, we do have a very narrow scabbard that is very light. That regardless of how you are wearing it, even just carrying it in your hand, it does not have a noticeable weight. In fact, the belt seems to weigh almost as much as the scabbard itself does. Now, I am not going to put the scabbard through durability tests. I am not going to smash it against things, bump against things purposefully while wearing it. I don't want to see how much damage this scabbard can put up with, because they're a pain in the butt to replace or repair. But it is a beautiful scabbard, a very good scabbard, and if you guys watch this, it slides in nicely, slides out nicely, and is a tight enough fit that I can hold the scabbard upside down, not holding the sword, and only after some shaking does it start to slip out, which is what I want from a scabbard. I don't want something where I have to squeeze to get the sword in there. I don't want something where it's going to be just falling out. I have had other swords that are one or the other of those, and they are a pain. Having something like this where it is a nice smooth fit in, but tight, nice smooth action coming out, and tight enough where it takes some pretty good shaking to get it out, exactly what I want. Now, if you guys just saw, I did catch the bare blade with my hands. I did not order this blade sharpened, nor do I plan on sharpening it, because again, I am not going to be performing cutting tests there. I am not going to be doing much of anything with it besides saying, oh, look at the cool sword I have, and taking some nice photos with it. I am a cosplayer and a LARPer. That is the extent of my interest in use for any of the arms and armor that I own or will own at some point in the future, as far as things stand currently with me. Now, would I recommend this sword? For most people, yes. If you are someone who's a bit taller than me, I would say probably if you're a good solid 5'10" or up, this would make a beautiful longsword for you. It would be a bit on the longer end for a longsword still, but it would be a beautiful longsword for someone a few inches taller than me. It handles nicely with one hand, it is light, it is well balanced, it is a nice, solid, thin blade. Now, for someone significantly shorter than me, this would make a fantastic light greatsword. It's not going to be as big and broad and sturdy as some of your other greatswords that you will find, even some of your shorter greatswords like the Scottish Claymores. But again, this is a 39-inch blade for someone who is 5'3", 5'4". It'll work just fine as a greatsword for you. Now, for someone looking to seriously use a sword, cutting tests, everything like that, I'm not the person to ask if this is the sword for you. Someone who is looking to have a really, really beautiful, nice looking piece that you can swing around, that you can probably put through some level of abuse, yes, this is the right sword for you if you are looking for some of those Northern European designs of the late Middle Ages, and are not looking for something very, very small. Now, again, with that two-handed design, it's going to be great for that level of control there, that level of finesse. If you want to use it as a greatsword and you are my height or taller, tough luck, not the sword for you. You want to use it as just a standard longsword, awesome. Now, the only thing to keep in mind about some of Darksword's products going into them is typically they are a little bit heavier than some of the alternatives that you will find on the market. As far as the similarly priced blades, they are pretty comparable in weight, but when you look at some of your much more high-end swords, they are going to be noticeably lighter. Now, I have commented several times on this one's weight. To my knowledge, with my experience in handling Darksword products, this does seem to be a little bit of an exception, where again, this is a 39-inch blade, and it is under 3 pounds. So, historically, that would be around what a sword this size would be. If I'm remembering correctly, it's something like 2 pounds, 11 ounces, something like that. So it is close to 3 pounds, but it is not quite there. A little heavier than you would find for a historical replica of this, one of the pieces you would find in a museum, one of the actual historical pieces, but it is still a perfectly reasonable, usable weight. Now, the only reason I would not recommend this blade to someone looking for a particularly large longsword or a particularly small greatsword is if you are looking for something that is going to fit very, very firmly into one of those categories. Like I've been talking about a lot, if you're looking for something that is a pure longsword and you are not someone who is at least a few inches taller than I am, it is going to be big. It is going to be too big to use practically as a greatsword, because as we can look at again here, I have to hold things pretty far out to get it sheathed and unsheathed, and it takes up a lot of space at my hip here. It goes out very far, which you will find longsword hilts that are even longer than this. That's not the biggest problem there. The biggest problem is how much it's going to trail behind. If I wear it up to have it at less of an angle, then it becomes too long to practically draw. But if you are looking for a small greatsword, again, probably not also the sword that you are looking for, as this is just not as hefty as some of the other smaller greatswords like the Scottish Claymore that you're going to find. The grip is shorter than a lot of those are. The blade is not as robust as a lot of those are. But again, still perfectly good, perfectly usable blade. Great new addition to my collection. And again, this is one that I would recommend to others looking for something in that kind of middle ground. Particularly that middle ground for someone my height, or if someone is looking for a slightly larger longsword who is at least a few inches taller than I am. So thank you for watching my review of the Darksword Danish two-handed sword, and I will see you guys again next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe.